All right, today we're diving into a really fascinating compound that's being used quietly by some pretty high performers and in certain medical circles. It's a peptide called Semax, and it's getting credit for some pretty remarkable effects on the brain. So let's get into it and find out why. You know that feeling, right? We've all been there. You're trying to lock in and focus, but your thoughts just feel laggy, like they're buffering. You end up reading the same line in an email 3 times, and it just won't stick. It's that cognitive quicksand of modern life, and honestly, it's exactly why people are out there searching for an edge. So what if you could actually clear out all that mental static? What if you could hit a sort of reboot switch? Well, that's the whole premise behind Semax. It's this peptide that people are using to cut through brain fog, sharpen their focus, and maybe even protect the brain from physical damage. Okay, so to really understand Cmax, we've got to start with the basics. We have to understand what a peptide even is. Now, I know it sounds like a complex sciencey term, but the concept is actually pretty simple. Think of peptides as tiny little biological messengers. They're basically short strings of amino acids, and their whole job is to send signals around your body and tell your cells what to do. To give you some perspective, the very first peptide ever identified for medical use was insulin. So yeah, we've understood just how powerful these little things can be for a very long time. So where does Cmax fit in? Well, it was actually engineered in a lab. Scientists took a tiny little piece of a much, much larger hormone. It's called adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH for short, and they basically used that little piece as a blueprint. And this, right here, is the genius of its design. See, the full ACTH hormone, that would trigger a massive flood of a stress hormone, cortisol. Nobody wants that. But by isolating and tweaking just the tiny fragment that affects the brain, researchers created something totally new. Cmax gives you the cognitive effects without that huge hormonal stress response. It basically skips the hormone stuff and goes right to work on the central nervous system. So what does this thing actually do? Why is it getting so much attention? Well, its benefits really fall into 2 main categories: boosting your brain performance and protecting it from harm.
So on one hand, you've got its use as a nootropic. People using it to feel sharper, to learn faster, to just maintain that laser focus. But on the other hand, it's neuroprotective. It has this whole history of being used to help the brain recover from really serious stuff, like strokes and traumatic injuries.
So how does it pull this off? Well, its main move is to boost a supercritical protein called BDNF. Honestly, the best way to think of BDNF is like fertilizer for your brain cells. It's absolutely essential for the growth, survival, and just general upkeep of your neurons. And Cmax is known to be a really powerful and direct way to jack up those levels. And the research shows some really tangible results. Take a look at this. A 1996 study showed this crazy jump in memory accuracy. After just a single use, the group that took Cmax hit 71% accuracy on memory tests, while the control group was stuck down at 41%. I mean, that is a huge difference from just 1 dose. And the evidence on the neuroprotective side is just as compelling. A pretty big study in 2018 in Russia looked at 110 stroke patients. And after just 2 10-day courses of Semax, they saw really significant improvements in their motor performance and their ability to just function on their own. This is a big deal because we have very few tools to improve brain function after something like a stroke has already happened. And the potential uses don't just stop with the brain. Researchers are looking at it for a whole range of issues, everything from ADHD-like symptoms to optic nerve problems. It's even been studied for its ability to help heal stomach ulcers, with one study reporting a 90% success rate. Pretty wild, right? Now, I know this might all sound very new age, very biohackery, but Cmax has actually been around for decades, and its story starts in a very specific place. So Cmax was first developed and researched way back in the 1980s in Russia. It was officially approved there for medical use in 2011, and just a year later, it was added to the country's official list of vital and essential drugs, especially for treating things like stroke. So this isn't some brand new trend. It has decades of real institutional medical use behind it. Which brings us to the big, obvious question, right? If this stuff has been studied since the 80s, and it's considered an essential medicine in a major country like Russia, why can't you just get a prescription from your local doctor here? Well, the biggest hurdle really just boils down to money. Because Cmax is an analog of a naturally occurring hormone sequence, it's super difficult to get a strong patent on it. And without a patent, a pharmaceutical company can't protect their investment. So there's almost no financial reason for them to spend the hundreds of millions of dollars it would take to run those huge, large-scale FDA-style trials. Now, for the people who are actually prescribed Cmax by a doctor,
It's typically given in two ways, either as a nasal spray, which gives it direct access to the brain, or as a small injection just under the skin. But it is absolutely critical to understand that these are just typical protocols. Real dosing must only be figured out and supervised by a qualified physician. Okay, so what about the downsides? Well, the reported side effects are generally pretty mild. We're talking things like some nasal irritation from the spray or maybe a headache. But there is a really crucial caution here. Because its effects aren't well studied in people with severe psychiatric conditions, it's strongly advised against for anyone with disorders like bipolar. And this brings us to the single most important warning we can give you. This quote from one of our sources really says it all. The unregulated online market for these substances is just incredibly dangerous. You risk getting products with totally inaccurate dosing, harsh chemical solvents, or even worse, contamination.
So let me be absolutely crystal clear about this. This is not a supplement. Semax is a powerful prescription substance. It should only be used under the guidance of a medical provider, and it should only be sourced from a legitimate, approved compounding pharmacy. Please do not try to experiment with this stuff on your own.
So where does that leave us? What's the final verdict on Semax? Is it a genuine breakthrough in brain science that's just being held back by economics? Or is it an unproven gamble outside of its original, highly controlled medical use? The evidence is definitely compelling, but the warnings are just as serious. The truth, as it often does, probably lies somewhere in the middle, and the answer really depends not just on the substance itself, but on who is supervising its use.